I'll go back to Dr. Rav Zakim, who's been there with us on the broadcast so far. Dr. Zakim, huge statements that have come in from both the presidents. Really, it's like handshake after handshake. They can almost hug at this point and show their respect and love for each other as far as those statements are concerned. Very, very warm show of words as far. And what about that last statement saying perhaps that next meeting may just happen in Moscow? Your take on what you gathered from the statements?
Well, it's clear that, as you said, the body language was very positive.
Yes.
The president called Putin Vladimir,
yes,
by his first name. Putin emphasized common heritage in Alaska. Not a word about the sale of Alaska, but rather the common heritage, the neighborliness. They seem to have indicated, at least Mr. Trump did, that they made some progress on Ukraine. What that progress is, he says he's going to speak to Zelensky, he's going to speak to NATO. What that progress is probably has Mr. Zelensky worried. And I very much doubt that Zelensky will go to Moscow. I mean, for all he knows, he could be arrested if he goes there. So, and Mr. Trump did not say, well, he said, I'll take a lot of heat. But he also seemed to indicate he's ready to take the heat.
He seemed keen on it. I mean, it wasn't a no
Absolutely.
Problem. Yes.
Absolutely. What I saw was warmth. As I mentioned before the press conference, just the way the delegations were sitting together. It's interesting, too, that the two men did not take questions from the press. This was a matter of messaging. Putin messaging that the U.S.-Russian relationship is back on track after Biden messed it up. That's the Putin message. Trump saying that, the Russia thing messed it up. The two men agreeing, as you said, that there wouldn't have been a war at all if they'd both been in charge. That is to say, if Trump had been reelected. So the message that is being put out is, first of all, don't think about secondary sanctions. Not a word about that. Secondly, if I'm Mr. Zelensky, I really have to worry. And third, these two men, Putin and Trump, definitely want to turn a corner. They both want to have good relations. And in that respect, I'm very curious to see how Mr. Xi Jinping over in Beijing is going to react to that.
Dr. Zakim, you've brought out some very, very important geopolitical implications that this is going to have, because this is going to now break headlines throughout the week, I feel, at least not for the next few days, more than that. I'll quickly cut across to Susan, who's there with us in New York. Susan, it was just minutes ago we were discussing, what one may expect. The statements seem full of positivity. The two countries, Russia and the two leaders, Russia and from the US, they both seem extremely happy having this interaction with each other. The fact that Putin has endorsed Trump's statement and claim that this war would have never happened had he been president. Putin saying yes, it wouldn't have, blaming it pretty much on the Biden administration. It goes right into what Trump has also been saying all this while. Your take on it before we get into more integrities.
Yeah, it was very interesting. They did really exchange a lot of pleasantries with one another, and it was very fascinating, as you and Dr. Zakim also mentioned, that that stamp of approval on President Trump's ongoing comments about had he been reelected and was president, then this war would not have happened. I thought it was very interesting that President Trump opened his comments by saying that there is no deal until there is a deal. He sort of informed the press a little more than Vladimir Putin. He said that he's going to be talking to NATO allies, and of course he's going to be talking to Volodymyr Zelensky soon on the phone. He said we made great progress, numerous times calling the Russian president Vladimir by his first name, as saying that we could have made a lot more progress in bilateral relationships if it wasn't for the Russia hoax that was sort of hovering over his head during the first administration, during his first term. He also said that there is an understanding when it comes to Ukraine. We are now getting a quote that President Trump called the meeting between the two sides as excellent. We did get a lot of color, and as you mentioned, a lot of pleasantries, but it's hard to imagine that we can really categorize what we just saw as a press conference. They did not answer any questions. The press tried to ask questions. this was really more statements by the two leaders coming out, appearing to be on the same page. But once again, as we've said all day, the devil's in the detail. I did sense maybe a little bit of concern in President Trump's face when Vladimir Putin was speaking. Might have been because he's tired, or might have been because he knows that he has very long conversations ahead with NATO allies and Volodymyr Zelensky moving forward. But, calling these talks excellent is one thing. Figuring out what kind of agreement they really reached is another, and I guess we'll soon find out.
Susan, stay on with me. I'll quickly go back to Dr. Zakhem. Doctor, this statement which came out from Putin, let's get into individual statements now, that we expect Kiev and the European countries not to throw a wrench in the works and stay clear of backdoor meetings. Strong words. Europe will not be happy after hearing these statements. Ukraine definitely would be anticipating some kind of clarity now from the US president. Your take on that?
Well, you're absolutely right. Clearly, if Mr. Putin is saying he doesn't want the Europeans and the Ukrainians to mess things up, then he means to mess things up for him and not for them, obviously. And so it is an indication that at least Putin believes that he is getting more of what he wants rather than what Zelensky or NATO might want. And what's interesting is that the president did not react to that. He didn't say anything at all. Not good, not bad, nothing. Which tells me that the president may not be entirely uncomfortable with what Putin said. And of course, the president said, look, it's not over till it's over. But he certainly didn't say there's a long way to go. There was no negative implication at all on the part of Trump, not one. And of course, not on the part of Putin, who's obviously delighted with how this has all gone. And so, again, as I'm repeating what I said earlier, Mr. Zelensky is probably very worried, and I doubt he's going to sleep well tonight.
I totally agree with what you're saying. That was my reading of the body language and this meeting as well. And even when it started, you saw the Russian president walking on stage first and speaking first as well. But there was, what the US president started with, and I'll quickly throw this out to Susan as well, that we did agree on some points, but we're yet to agree on the big ones. But again, not an ounce of any kind of, he wasn't restricted in terms of what he felt about the meeting. He's out and out being very positive about it. But Susan, which would perhaps be the big ones that, they haven't agreed to just as yet?
Well, we were talking prior about how President Trump hopes to get some kind of confirmation of a ceasefire, the cessation of hostilities and attacks on the part of Russia against Ukraine. I think it'll be very interesting to see moving forward after today how that's going to pan out, how Russia is going to, whether or not continue its attacks against Ukraine, to what extent and to what severity. On the other hand, it does appear that President Trump didn't want to give anything away until he, first of all, talks to Volodymyr Zelensky, but also NATO allies as well. So he was very measured in what he could share and what he could not. I think, while they said that they agreed on some issues, it's hard to imagine that the delegations prior to this meeting hadn't had some kind of understanding going into this meeting on what the two sides were willing to agree on. And I think that they sort of talked more about the details of those, issues that they pointed to more than, really just starting over and, getting into various issues. I'll be very interested to see to what extent they talked about bilateral relations between the two sides. I think that'll be very interesting to see moving forward. But really, besides the fact that it seemed like it was very positive, and according to President Trump, it was quote unquote excellent, it's really hard to tell what has been agreed upon. And maybe they don't want to say that because it's very unclear whether or not Ukraine would even be on board with what's being agreed upon. The point of optimism perhaps here is that President Trump said that we're probably going to be meeting again very soon. Again, that what you read into the fact that President Putin said hopefully in Moscow or next time in Moscow or something like that. that itself again raises questions on what that means. Is Putin trying to sort of sideline the Ukraine issue and focusing more on bilateral relations, or did he mean that in another way? We'll just have to read through the tea leaves to figure that out. But I think it was a good sign that President Trump said we're probably going to be meeting soon. I think he probably was pointing to that meeting that he's hoping to get between Zelensky, Putin, and himself.
It all seems positive. It all seems good as far as Russia and the US is concerned. How good it's going to be for Europe or Ukraine at this point? Now, that is something, as Dr. Zakhem had pointed out, I don't think Zelensky is going to be sleeping well tonight. But let me just quickly go back to this one statement that came from Putin, that Trump is clear on what he wants to achieve. Susan, stay with me. I'll quickly go over to Dr. Zakhem. What do you feel, sir, that this is what Putin found, that Trump is clear on what he wants to achieve, and it's absolutely clear what Putin wants to achieve. They're both very happy having those handshakes with each other. What does this really mean for Russia and the US per se, keeping Ukraine out of the picture at this point?
Well, first of all, the big triumph, in a sense, for Mr. Putin is that nobody forced his hand. They are, as you pointed out earlier in this telecast, they are making some progress on the battlefield. The longer Mr. Trump doesn't force Putin's hand, the longer Russian forces are going to make some progress. So the delay works in Putin's favor. That's number one. Number two, Trump said, look, we've made a lot of progress, but we haven't solved the big one. But what he didn't say was, we must do this quickly. That interested me, because you would have thought Trump would be in a hurry to get a deal. Maybe he's pushing privately, but he certainly didn't indicate that he was in such a hurry that he had to do it even before he met in Moscow. And of course, we don't have a date for that anyway. So, I think Putin's done very well out of this. Trump, I think, got what he wanted, which was at least to bring Putin to the table. He seems to have been able to somehow mollify NATO. He's keeping Zelensky informed. Again, I will be very surprised if Zelensky goes to Moscow. That would be truly amazing, and that would be a major indication that a deal is there. But right now, it looks like Putin got what he wanted, which was not being forced in any which way to stop his attacks. No mention of secondary sanctions. No mention on the part of Mr. Trump of threats of any kind. If you're Putin, you unlike Zelensky, you will sleep well tonight.
I get what you're saying. Susan, as far as what Trump said, as far as what the Russian president said, that in order to make settlement, eliminate the primary roots and causes of the conflict. This one statement pretty much says that as far as Russia is concerned, they are very clear on what has caused this conflict. They want that to be eliminated. Does this show any kind of a hint of Russia also making some kind of compromises? Because as far as Russia and US is concerned, they're pretty much agreeing. The two leaders are really happy, agreeing with each other's causes. But as far as the cause of the war is concerned, Russia seems to be right where they were in 2022.
Yeah, that's the point, Siobhan, that I wanted to actually bring up, which was sort of a cause for concern when you listen to it, when he talks about, the root causes, the primary causes of the conflict, they need to be addressed. We know that's a long laundry list that Russia has. And Russia has always said that since the beginning of the conflict. Its excuse was these so-called root causes when it attacked Ukraine. So it's hard to imagine what part and where Russia wants to make compromises when it once again goes back to that. There are points in that include, for example, the denazification, quote unquote, of Ukraine, which would start with basically Volodymyr Zelensky not being the Ukrainian leader, putting him aside. I mean, that's not going to happen at this point in time. There are a lot of other issues. There's just border issues as well. So, I thought that was very interesting, and I wanted to bring that to the forefront as well. When he mentioned that, it just appears that Russia has not backed down from any of its demands. But we'll have to, again, wait and see. Maybe there is something here that we're going to learn more about after President Trump speaks with Volodymyr Zelensky and his European allies. And maybe there is some kind of hope for a breakthrough. But it's very hard to imagine what Russia's incentive is right now at this point to back down, besides the pressure that it's facing from the United States, possibly with secondary sanctions and the economic aspect of it.
Susan, but there was not a word about those secondary sanctions and nothing from the body language which would make one predict that perhaps that talk is going to come back. Not a word about it, nothing that has come in terms of a statement, nothing from this current press conference that would make one assume that perhaps that is still on the table. Is it too early to rule it out?
I think it is too early. I think President Trump has been very clear, saying that, again, right before this press conference, as the two leaders were meeting, he was talking to Fox News. And during that interview, he said that, if this meeting doesn't work out and if things don't go as planned, this is probably going to be the last time that we meet with the Russians, that the United States is going to have a meeting with Russia. The Trump administration believes that it has the tools in its toolbox to go all out against Russia and put economic pressure on Russia and countries that are doing business with Russia. It's confident in that sense, and also arming Ukraine. But ultimately, whether or not the U.S. prefers to do that, the Trump administration prefers to do that or not, that's another question. But nonetheless, you're absolutely right. There was no talk of that. There was no talk of so many other things. I mean, as Dr. Zakheim also noted, the urgency that President Trump really demonstrated prior to going to this meeting, you really didn't see that kind of urgency during that press conference or those press statements trying to, get an end to this war as soon as possible. It really did seem like, okay, this is just the first step of a longer set of negotiations. At least that's what it appeared to be. I mean, maybe we'll find out something tomorrow or the next few hours.
Susan, speaking with you and obviously Dr. Dov Zakheim as well, just as we're discussing that, a lot more is coming to light about what we first perceived from that meeting. But as we discuss it and get into each statement, one realizes what kind of a body language there was and what one can perhaps expect in the hours or the days to come. But as of now, we'll slip into a short break. Thank you so much for being with me. And we'll be, of course, tracking these developments very closely. That was Dr. Dov Zakheim, who was there with us on the broadcast all throughout. And, of course, Susan Tehrani with us from New York. Short break now. Stay with us.